So Meagan, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm so glad to be sitting here with you and get to learn more about you and your journey and how you became an engineer, an educator, an influencer, and everything that you do. So I guess to get started off, let's start towards the beginning. How did you even learn about computer science and engineering, and how did you get into those fields?
Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here with you. And so how I got into computer science and engineering is like most girls who get into these programs because their daddy is a computer scientist or an engineer. And that's certainly part of the work that both you and I do to change that. But my dad's a computer scientist, my granddad's a computer scientist. And so I started programming, which was quite unique coming from a very rural community in Texas. My first programming class in high school was in 8th grade. And then the teacher who decided she wanted to teach us how to do this, she actually moved to the high school with us. And so I had programming for several years. And despite that, being president of the robotics clubs and this, that, or the other, I still didn't pick computer science or engineering. I actually initially had chosen to study interior design, had my dorm picked out, everything. I really thought I wanted to be an architect. I still love buildings and I still love architecture, but somehow I didn't think that I could be an architect because I didn't know any architects, much less any women architects. But then the week of that I graduated high school, I was like any good sort of sycophant student, was after school talking to my biology teacher. My chemistry teacher walked in and she was trying to tell, Ms. Reeves, and she says, hey, my cousin who's a professor at Texas Women's University, she just got this grant with Texas Instruments, and the whole thing is to get more women to study computer science and engineering. And so Dr. Estes turns to me and she's like, you would be perfect for this. She's like, you're prepared for this. You're interested in this. This is for you. And then she was like, and it's at Texas Women's University. So I stormed out because I said, I am not going to Women's University. I got halfway down the hall and I was like, wait a minute, did she say full scholarship? So I actually turned back around, came in and I said, okay, how do I contact your cousin? And so I contacted TWU. They didn't even have an application yet. So I made my own application and and I sent it to TWU and I said, I heard you have this program coming. I want to be a part of it. And so I was the first student given the money for this women in engineering program. And the program was to take women who are majoring in computer science and math, pay for their school. You get internships at Texas Instruments, and then you go on to get a master's in electrical engineering from Texas Tech University. And, I did like these things, but what Dr. Estes did in that moment that she doesn't recall, and she's heard me tell the story many times, is that she boosted my self-efficacy just enough that it tipped the scale for me. And it made me think, I can do this. I am interested in this. I do want to do this. Because I was always very interested in engineering. I always wanted to create widgets. I was like the only kid in Southeast Texas that had a Palm Pilot in 9th grade, which, at my age, pre-cell phone, pre-iPhone, but my whole life was on this little Palm Pilot, And so that was how I got into it. And so it was a full scholarship that really tipped the scale and began my journey into this work.
So you did all this robotics, all this computer science in high school. Did you ever have any advisors or anyone there that encouraged you to go to computer science or engineering when you were looking at universities?
No.
Nobody.
No, nobody. And this is, so much of the work that I do and have done over the last 12 years is teacher professional development, counselor professional development. I'm one of the few people, at least originally, who had ever published on training counselors around STEM careers. And that was a lot of the work that I did when I was at Purdue, publishing on that. Mm-hmm. And the reason is so, the educators just thought, well, she's not interested. If I didn't just automatically pick that, they just thought I wasn't interested. But what they didn't see, and what, so much of the work that I do is to help educators see all of the barriers that were preventing me from seeing myself in that field. Mm-hmm. Not only the social cognitive ones, but also the physical barriers of not necessarily physical, but bigger barriers around financing and because it wasn't like my parents ever said, you can't be an engineer. Now, grandma did actually say that. Grandma actually did say, women don't become engineers. And bless my God, rest her soul. She just passed, but and she finally came around to saying, fine, you can be an engineer,
Good.
but yeah, it was, your parents want you to be successful. They want you to do better than they did. And so they were certainly supportive once I got on that pathway. Yeah.
Did your dad or your grandpa ever bring up the idea of you being an engineer or computer science when they were watching you do all this coding or anything?
Well, so what's interesting about my dad is he's a self-taught computer scientist and engineer. So
Wow.
he actually doesn't have that identity. So even though he is an engineer currently,
Mhm.
he only has a 2-year degree. And so he can't be, nobody calls him an engineer. I call him an engineer, but there are so many roles about who gets to be an engineer. And because he was so self-taught, and because he like started out as a machinist and
Wow.
thought, I can figure out how to program this and so that it can do my job. And he
Mhm.
did. And then he just continued to learn how to program. And now he does, engineering design work for like plastic die extrusion stuff. But I think that was a big part of it because he didn't see himself as that. And so it wasn't like well, you can be this thing, because it was almost like he didn't think himself he could be that thing,
Yeah.
And his dad, the other computer scientist who like still, pokes around in like COBOL and Fortran, which are like really old languages, but they're coming back
Yeah.
to some degree. They lived far away, so we actually didn't see them very much. But funny enough, he did actually, I do remember as a kid him saying, hey, you should come to Purdue. And I was like, Purdue? What? And then, come full circle,
Yeah.
I did go to Purdue for my
Yeah.
doctorate.
It's funny how those things work out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were in that, so you were the first one in the program. How many other people ended up joining into the program? How long was it before anyone else joined you in that computer science engineering program?
There were about a dozen of us over the course of time that went all the way through.
Wow.
One of which is one of my best friends today, Heather McClendon. Interestingly enough, neither one of us are still in engineering. But the program was challenging because it took women who were majoring in computer science and math, and then you go get a master's in electrical engineering. So there was an inherent sort of almost a fault in the program because a master's in electrical engineering really assumes that you have a bachelor's level knowledge.
Yeah.
And so the success rate wasn't, 100% of people who finished that bridge. And they did a lot of work to help us at Texas Tech. But, I took circuits at the same time I took, electronics at the same time I took mixed signal analog test. And like each of those assumed I knew the other. And it was really hard. So I think after a while, they shifted the money to Texas Instruments, shifted the money to different programs. But, I'm still in touch with a handful of the women who were at least in part of that program. And TWU is still going strong, creating women who are going into computer science. They don't have an engineering program there, but yeah, so there were probably a few dozen of us over the course of time. I don't know how many women ended up graduating in the end, but I think they found like there might be a little bit better way of getting women into this.
So I'm kind of curious, going to a women's university, was it all women at that university, or what did that look like when you started there?
So TWU is actually a state school. So because it's a state school and state funded, it's not only women. It used to be, 100 years ago, it was only women. But, because of Title IX and civil rights, like it's because it's state funded, it has to be, you have to allow everyone to attend. So at the time that I was there were actually about 10% men that attended.
Okay.
But many of them attended for the occupational and physical therapy programs because the school is really known for that. But there were men in some of my classes, but not many. It was so like at TWU, I went from having like one man, maybe two in my class to being at Texas Tech, where I was the only woman in a class full of 70.
Yeah,
So
I was gonna ask, is that like a very strange transition
it
or?
was very strange, but
Yeah.
there's tons of research that supports single gender classrooms, particularly for within STEM, because it reduces, the stereotype threat that women experience, that unconscious sort of adapting and having to fight to like have access to different, experiments that you're doing. And so I do think that because I had the experience of being of the dominant culture at TW, that's what allowed me to persist. Now, I actually did not go straight through. I don't know
Yeah.
if you know this, but I actually went and lived in Spain in between those 2 degrees.
I was
Um,
curious.
yeah, so I took some time off, and I was a little burnout, and then I did come back. Although when I left for Europe, I had planned to not return, but turns out I just needed a really good vacation.
How
Worked
long
as an
were
au
you in
pair when
Spain
I was
for, and what did you do while you were there?
I was an au pair, so that's a fancy French term for like
Wow.
nanny, I think. But
Yeah.
I worked for a Spanish family and lived in Malaga, Spain. They had a housekeeper, they had a nanny. My job was to play with these beautiful little girls, 2 and 6, and to teach them English. And
Wow.
so it was pretty great. I worked, like 30 hours a week. I studied at the university. I learned Spanish while living there, and then I went to the beach every day. It's a pretty good life. And I was there, I worked for them for 6 months, but I was in Europe total of about 7.5 months.
Do you feel like that was like necessary for that, like you said, like refresh after the burnout?
It was critical for it. I had been pretty classic overachiever for most of my life, maybe still a little bit, but
Yeah.
I was just burnt out. Like I had hustled and hustled to be excellent so I could get the college scholarships. And then, I graduated early from college, and I just needed some time. I needed to go explore. And I'm also really keen to say, like, my parents did not pay for this. Like, they were not supportive of it. Like, I did it all on my own. And worked while I was living there, and lived 8 cans of tuna when my family was not feeding me. But it was really critical, and it was on my birthday, halfway through that time, when I was hiking, and we were all of the family, we were hiking, and the father of the family who lived next door, and they were related, but he said, "What are you doing, Megan?" I was like, "I'm hiking up a mountain." And he's like, "No, what are you doing with your life?" And these people, both of these families they were business owners. They had, the woman who lived next door, she was a PhD civil engineer. Her brother, who was the father of the house, the family I lived in, they own the largest civil engineering firm in all of Southern Europe. And then, one of them had the largest clothing distributor in all of like Europe and Africa. So these are like important people who had big jobs. And so Manolo, he's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm hiking up a mountain." He's like, "No, what are you doing with your life? You need to do something important." He's like, "You're too smart. You need to go home and you need to make a life for yourself." And so I was a little like thrown back by that. And so I ended up finishing the rest of the hike by myself. And then I came back to the house, and I immediately emailed Texas Tech, and I was like, "Hey, so like my name's Megan, and I think I want to come back." And no kidding, they said, "We'll see you in January." This was October 7th. I didn't register. Like, they took care of everything. I had already taken the GRE, just so that was done.
Mhm.
And they really did take care of everything. So I showed up, got $9,000 a semester. So they knew who I was, and they were sort of waiting for me to like come back. So that was that. So yeah, I did need that time, and I did learn a lot and grow a lot during that time as well.
Do you think there's anything you would say to someone who maybe they're like starting on that path right now? They're like early on in their education and they're already starting to feel that burnout. Like, is there any way to, or like based on what you're looking at and any reflection of your own experience, like to prevent that burnout so it goes to that point? Or how could you slow it down? Or what would you have done differently? Not that you would want to change anything necessarily, but
Yeah. That's a great question. It's something I think a lot about, because I have actually experienced burnout a few times in my life. But what I think I've recently realized is that burnout came when I was working hard to please other people. And now that I have shifted and I run my own company and I do my own business, I still work the same obscene amount of hours. I still do the same kind of work, but I am not seeking validation from anyone else. Like I mean, I would like to have validation of clients who like hire me to do work, right? But like
Yeah.
my hustle isn't for someone else to pay me more, isn't for someone else to promote me, isn't for someone else to like make me feel valued. And so I think for me, working for myself has reduced that tendency that I have to like work so hard to please an employer when nobody is going to be able to really give us what we need in those kinds of areas. So I don't know that I'm the best person to give advice on like how to not burn out, other than like work for yourself, but that's a very complicated piece of advice in and of itself, you know. But I don't know, like I think also like it was certainly a privilege to be able to take off and go across the country or go across the globe. And you know, some people have parents who might support them. Mine were not supportive. And you know, when I burn out another time, I was able to like take a little, you know, couple months sabbatical from work. And so I think there's also importance of just listening to your body and paying attention to it. Something else I've learned as an entrepreneur working for myself is that like I don't have to go 90 to nothing all the time. That I'm learning to like listen to my body and like ride the creative waves. So if, you know, bursts of energy and productivity and inspiration come, I ride that wave. But then, you know, when it sort of settles down, like use those periods of when things settle down to like regenerate and, you know, renew. And because you can't go 90 to nothing all the time. Like you will definitely burn out, gas out, have heart, you know, chest pains and lots of stress.
Yeah. I like how you said that though. That's beautifully said, of like when we are doing things for validation, we're much more likely to burn out. And it's so true. Like no amount of validation is ever enough when we're doing things purely for validation of like, tell me that I'm doing well. Cause it's like you can get every A plus, perfect scores, and everyone around you saying like, oh my goodness, you're doing the best in the class, or you're doing the best on this. And it doesn't matter. Like you still have to keep striving for that next thing. And it's never like satisfying until you can have that internal piece of like, okay, I'm enough. Like this is me, and then doing it for what we love. Like, so I love how you said that.
Oh, good. That's a very new awareness, actually, like in the last couple of months. So
isn't it cool how that always happens? So it's like, why didn't I know that like 10 years ago? But yeah. And it's hard to say like stop seeking validation, because right.
I think particularly as women, we are conditioned, like literally like wired based on our, you know, how we are nurtured to seek that validation. And so it takes and I still certainly seek validation in lots of ways, but like but having to unwire that and sort of coach ourselves out of that behavior is hard.
Yeah. And I think that like, you know, I'm excited to hear and get more into it, like your mission and what you're doing now and everything. But I think having something like that you're so like connected to and that's so important to you, and then striving for that mission helps with that a lot. Because then it's not just like I'm overachieving for societal standards. It's like, okay, I have an internal like purpose and mission that I'm working towards.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you came back and you started in January.
We did.
And like, how was that like transit? Because
it was brutal.
Yeah.
I moved from the coast of the Mediterranean to Lubbock, Texas in January. And if you've never been to Lubbock, Texas in January, it is a dust bowl, like literally just like dust, because all the crops have been picked up. And like, I remember sitting on my balcony and it was like new construction and it was looking over just like a barren dirt field. I cried. I was like, what have I done? Like, because the house where I was living like overlooked the Mediterranean. And so I got to run on the beach every day, and then going from that to cold January, that was brutal. But, I made friends and plugged in, and then you learn to love, I've traveled a lot, and you have to appreciate every place for what it is, And so you can't compare Lubbock, Texas to Malaga, Spain, because they're different. But it was a pretty stark transition.
What about, like, I know a lot of people get scared of like taking time off, and it's like when we're in school, you're constantly doing equations, calculations, all this different book work, reading textbooks, everything. And then all of a sudden, if you take time off, like, you're not deeply rooted in all of that constant study, homework, projects. And then you have to go back to it. And it's the fact that you're going from undergrad to master's, and it's just that much harder. Like, how did you face that?
Well, only having a year off, I didn't lose any of the math. Now, today, I couldn't do a derivative to save my life, but that's because I haven't done it in, 20 years or something like that, 15 years. But so a year off of math wasn't bad. But I also, when I lived in Spain, I went to the university. I studied Spanish for 5 hours a day. So like I was still in school mode. And I've always loved school and learning, and have always learned to be a good student. So it wasn't a hard transition. Now, what was hard is that all of our classes were at 8 a.m. and they did that to prepare us for the workforce. And so that was pretty brutal.
Yeah.
But it did prepare us for the workforce.
That's funny. So if somebody was going back and they didn't feel like they were prepared, you think like even just going to a university for the purpose of studying Spanish, like being in those habits, and like if they were to go do like an online course or something would kind of help?
The first thing is always ask for help. Like, just because you don't remember something doesn't mean you can't do it, So like, and universities, community colleges, learning centers, there are so many resources available to people where you can get free help, where people are there to be available and tutor you, and to never be ashamed or, shy to do that. Like, those services are there for people, and like they want to help people, and they're excited when you show up. And so actually, I had a lot of tutors at Texas Tech, and a lot of it was helping me, it was bridging work because I was taking so many of the same, compounding classes. But I remember like one person that they paired me up, it was another student paired me up with for tutoring, like it didn't work. And I went back to the dean and I was like, I need somebody else. This is not working. And he's like, okay. And he gave, assigned me to somebody else. And that was so much easier than I thought, because I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to like make this work, and it's not working. And so it took a lot of courage to go and say, Dr. Parton, like, it's not working. And he's like, okay, great. Like, and he just took it away and like fixed it. And so, finding a tutor, finding a counselor, finding anybody, like, it's kind of like dating. You have to find who's going to be the best fit, and then don't be afraid to say like, this isn't working, move on.
Why wasn't it working?
I don't remember. I don't remember. Like, I truly don't. And I don't even remember who it was, but I just remember what has stuck in my mind. Because I was 24, it was 16 years ago. 23, 17 years ago. So I just remember going and asking, because I think that clearly was like a milestone or some kind of marked moment in my memory of like speaking up for myself and saying like, I need something and I need you to help me get it. And, not being afraid to ask for that. So that's advice I give to students, is like, this is your education. Like, you are the owner, you are the driver. Don't passively wait for someone else to read your mind and to give you what you need. Like, you're in charge. Like, you are the customer in these instances. And like, and what's interesting is and I've been like that for all of my degrees, like very much like, this is what I want to do. This is what you're telling me I have to do, but this is what I want to do. And I'm, make proposals and plans, and they're always opposite of what people prescribe. And there's always like hesitance and like reticence to let me do it. But what's interesting is everybody takes credit for it in the end. They're like, oh, look at this exemplary student who like built her education. I'm like, y'all didn't want me to do it, you know, like now you want to take credit.
Right.
But they get credit for like letting me craft my own path per se. So
Mhm. So did you work at Texas Instrument while you were doing your master's?
So it's a co-op program. So we received like a fellowship stipend. So it was free money. It was $9K a semester. And then so I was studied for a year, and then I did a 7-month internship at TI in Dallas. And then I came back and it took me 2 months to write my thesis, which was
Wow,
based on the
that's
work I
fast.
did. And I was done. So I actually did my master's, and it was a year of classes,
Mhm.
7-month internship, 2 months of writing. So I was done, and I actually started back at TI in October. So I wasn't supposed to start until January, but I was like, let me get to work. So I started in October. Yeah. So
And
I didn't.
yeah. No, what were
So
you
you
about
got paid an engineer salary when working at TI. So you had the stipend fellowship, but then I think, trying to remember, it seemed like a lot back then. It was like 19, $20 an hour back then, which
Mhm.
when we look at like, the new minimum wage trying to be 15, that seems like not much, but that was back in 2005. It was pretty good.
Yes, definitely. So then what did your work look like? I guess compare the co-op during your undergrad and then after your master's and before you finished the degree. And then once you finished the degree and you went back in October, like what did it look like? What type of work were you doing at those 3 different like major different milestones?
So the internship I actually had 2 internships during my undergrad. I had a 2-month one. So it was a summer internship between my first and second year of college. And that one was very different because they actually called it an internship. The others were all actually called co-ops. So the internship meant like, basically they gave me a seat, and it was my job to like learn and explore as much as I could in 2 months. And I did have a project, and the person I worked for was Ted Thomas. He's still a friend of mine today. I remember like I saw he gave me his novel. He wrote a novel, and
Oh,
he's been a big part of my life. But the project I did there was a market gap analysis study. And so, I looked at like the pricing curves and did a bunch of data tables. And so that was fun. And then the second internship I had was a 10-month internship that I negotiated on my own. And that was in Tucson. So I went out to Tucson for 10 months. Again, not what my advisors wanted me to do, but I had started college with 29 hours. And so the pace I was on, I was going to graduate in like 2.5 years.
wow.
And I was like, I don't want to graduate in 2.5 years, like I want to have more college. And so I had this 10-month internship, and then I came back for 1 semester and then graduated still in 3.5 years. And then that internship. So advice on internships, make sure you have a project, because that 10-month one, I worked, but actually don't know what I did because like there wasn't a project. I made some lifelong friends, but you should always have a project for an internship. Now, the Texas Tech internship, my project was my master's thesis. And so I studied the permeation and diffusion of moisture into the headspace of the digital micromirror device. And then I continued that work as a full-time engineer. And I was a product engineer. So the difference between the co-op, and then being a full-time employee is that I was officially a product engineer. So even though my degree is electrical, a product engineer means they had these portfolio of digital micromirror devices, and they all had different specs. And I owned a portion of the portfolio in the sense that I was responsible for the production, all the manufacturing issues, quality control, as it handed off from the designers to the customer. So we handled that whole middle process. And so I was on the phone, like 3 nights a week with, Malaysia and Singapore, because that's where we were like producing things. I think that's where they were. Maybe Philippines. I don't remember. I just remember like I had 10 p.m. phone calls and then had to be at work at 8 a.m.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, loads of fun. And so managing those devices. So it was just different because, the shift from being a student to being an employee, like you lose some of that cyclical nature of like finishing things.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that being really hard of like, nothing's ever finished, like I needed that sense of like, I need to be able to be done with something. And so that was a really hard transition for me, but you adapt and you learn.
Yeah. I remember like transitioning, like thinking that when I was a student, everything's gonna be like design process, So you're like, everything's gonna be just like design, go through the whole process. You're doing all these testing, you do have a prototype, and then you'll do production. And it was just like in my head, like you're saying, like the finish, you wanted like the start to the end, but then all of a sudden it's like different. You're like, oh, like this is different than what I thought it would be. Do you think, I don't know, like, is that something that would be like a change that needs to happen in education to address that? Or like training that needs to happen at a company? Like, how do you deal with that?
That's a good question. I remember having this conversation with one of like my boss's boss, and because she had actually gone through the same program at Texas Tech, and
Mhm.
and I think she advised me to like find ways that I could feel that sense of completion. And
Mhm.
so, whether it be different side projects I was working on, because, we were still trying to make everything better, faster, smaller,
Yeah.
cheaper, all these things. So like to find those different things and to just learn how to celebrate milestones of like along the way. So I don't know if it's something you can really, I think you can certainly equip students with realizing like, hey, life isn't going to run from, August to December anymore.
Right. That too.
You have to have like, you have to learn how to sort of adapt in that. And I think that's just part of moving into the workforce. But I
Mhm.
do remember Amy is her name, Amy Pedraza, telling me that of just like, you just got to find the things that you can sort of measure and track and celebrate those milestones.
I like that. So then, why did you leave the workforce and why did you decide to go to graduate school at Purdue University?
Yeah. Well, so I always wanted a PhD ever since kindergarten. How a kindergartner with like parents who did not have PhDs want a PhD. So my aunt, my dad's sister, has a PhD in electrical engineering. Now, she wasn't actually ever a role model for like electrical engineering
Mhm.
because she wasn't I didn't see her much growing up. I just knew that she had a PhD and she was smart, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so even when I was at TI, I was talking to schools. I was talking to UT Dallas, looking at PhD programs. Um, but I was trying to figure out how I was going to do it while working because I didn't want to give up my engineering salary. But sometimes the universe has different plans for us. And in 2000 and late 2008, early 2009, technology took a huge dump. It was part of the housing crisis, and all of that was lumped together. So the end of January, they laid off or let go 42% of my business group. It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, had I waited to start until January, like I was supposed to, I wouldn't have been laid off. I would have been protected. But because I started early, because I was anxious and I started, my dog is agreeing. Because I
Yes.
started in October, I got swept up in it. And I wasn't able to be protected. So I always thought that was kind of interesting. But because I was eager to get started. I couldn't be protected. But you know, so I got, walked out. I remember calling one of my mentors, Art George. I met him during my very first internship, and he went on to be the first Black senior vice president at TI. And he's still, a friend of mine today. And it was his business group that had paid for the program for my undergrad and my master's. And I was like on loan to DLP because that was not the same business group that had paid for my school. And I remember calling him and saying, like, I got hit today, Art. I got laid off. And he was like, we paid for your school. He's like, go do something great. Go do something awesome. I'm sorry that this happened, but he's like, I know that you've got a bright future. You're gonna land on your feet. You're gonna be awesome. And so within a week's time, I had heard about and applied to Purdue. So
wow.
Yeah.
Within a week.
Yeah, well, I didn't let, any sun get beneath my feet, whatever that saying is, because I knew I needed a plan, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. But the unfortunate thing is that the way that by the time I had gotten laid off, like all of the fellowships had been kind of disseminated. And so our TI's previous CEO, Tom Ingibus, was a Purdue grad. And somebody connected me to Tom. So I had a phone call with Tom, and Tom made a phone call to Purdue. And I think he had just donated like $34 million or something. So like, so he called Purdue and said, give this woman a fellowship. I earned it, right? Like I had great, I graduated like cum laude and, all of those things, but it was enough for him to say like, okay, she missed the deadline, find some money for her. And so it was really, that's the one and only time I've really talked to Tom Ingibus ever, but he did that for me, and I really appreciated that. And then so that was like all happening end of January and February. I got accepted really fast, and I moved to Indiana in April. So like it all happened really fast, and I started working for them. I didn't start until the fall, but I left engineering because I had experienced some pretty unfortunate, things as a woman and in industry. And I was determined. I wanted to change the culture of engineering. I wanted to do work that was going to create cultures and climates where women could be more successful than they had been because of so many barriers that people had faced, and that we could get more women and people of color into those fields. And that has remained my vision since. Yeah.
Oh. Remind me, I think that when you did your PhD program, when you first came in, didn't you come under one advisor and then you switched advisors?
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that journey, or you want to avoid that?
So Purdue at the time, they had changed this, by the way.
Yes.
But when I started at Purdue, you had to pick an advisor before you got there, and they had to be your advisor. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think you have like a year, and I want to believe that I had some influence over that because I had a real problem with it. So I came in under an advisor, and it didn't work out. And it didn't work out because I ended up, like every good overachiever, coming down with the worst case of mono that Purdue had ever seen my very first semester.
Oh God.
How in the world this happened, I don't know, but like it did. And I always I regret making fun of people who got mono, because I was like, how could it be that bad? Okay, listen, it can be that bad. Like I couldn't get out of bed. I thought my head was going to crack open, and it lasted for 2 months. And so I ended up I couldn't work. I couldn't come to class. And I was so grateful for my professors that first semester for giving me so much grace. And I also didn't know anybody, right? Like I'm living in a state that I don't know anybody. I don't have a support network. And she had done some really unprofessional, unempathetic, unkind things while I was sick. And I I couldn't salvage working with her. And so I changed advisors. I asked to like just get her off my docket and then like interview some other people. I was told by the previous dean to grow up and just pick someone, or previous chair, or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
And I made a big complaint about like, don't speak to me like that, like I'm not being a petulant child here. I'm telling you there's a problem with your system.
Yeah.
And that's the work that we do, is like, how do we change the system to better support students? And so that policy's changed, so people get time now to like get to know people. So yeah, I did switch, and I found an advisor that was going to give me the flexibility and the freedom that I need. And so that was really important, is like knowing how you work. And so because I ended up getting a graduate research fellowship, I didn't need to like do their research. I just needed someone who was going to let me operate how I need to operate. And I do not work well under someone who micromanages. I don't work well under someone who like, I need freedom. I need flexibility. I need to be able to do that. And so the advisor I ended up picking, Monica Cardella, was a really great choice for me. And maybe she gave me a little bit too much freedom at times, but like, but I ended up, I finished, and so that worked out well. But yeah, changing advisors is really hard because people like get upset about it, and there's hurt feelings, and the fields that we're in, like, they're not that big, right? Like,
Right.
so,
Yeah.
so what I will say is like, you never want to burn bridges. My dad has given me that advice since I was a little girl, and that is always in my head. And so I have been very, very cautious as a professional, as an adult, to like, don't burn bridges, because you never know when you're going to need that bridge, when it's going to be there. And just to maintain your dignity in all as best you can. So
Have you had any contact with that advisor since, just out of curiosity?
yeah, actually she reached out recently, and asked me to be on one of her I had to send her like on one of her NSF grant proposals.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did
Again,
you, what?
I think, big picture, I think she was going through something also. And so again, I respect this woman. I respect her. I think that we just had different working styles. And again, I have tried and don't want to burn that bridge, but she's not at Purdue anymore. And so I wish her success if she hears this.
Well, clearly you didn't burn that bridge then. So clearly you were able to make that transition without
I hope so.
permanently, like without burning the bridge, which is huge. And it's a cool story of like knowing like, okay, it is possible to change advisors.
Yeah. It also helped. I think she was taking a sabbatical.
Yeah.
So like,
Good
it kind of like the timing worked out.
Yeah. That's awesome. How did you become so like aware of your own work styles and knowing like this is what I need for being successful, like this is how I'm most successful, and defining like what does that workspace look like for you?
Yeah. I have always been, thank you to my third grade teacher, perhaps, like really reflective. And I set a lot of goals. She taught us how to do that, and then like taught us how to reflect on and like set new goals. And so, Ms. Babcock, I just remember her teaching us that. And so it's been part of like a self-awareness constantly of like, what's working for me, what's not working for me. I think maybe also because of our engineering training, like I always think about like process, order, and efficiency.
Yeah.
Like my brain is just like constantly like spinning, like process, order, efficiency. And so you're laughing like you understand.
I totally understand. Yes. All the time, from the smallest little thing around the house to anything and everything.
Yeah. And so I think because, like we're trained that way, like I think of myself as that, like process, order, efficiency. If this isn't working for me, how do I find something that is, and how do I like say what isn't working for me and then find what is going to work. I have never really loved that statement to like bloom where you're planted, because, and somebody, I can't take the credit for this, but they equated that to, that's a toxic environment, right? Like I don't want to just stay where I'm miserable and where they don't want me to be successful. Like I'm going to change my environment, and I'm going to find a place that's going to nurture and cultivate and, empower me. And so some people might call that selfish. Some people might call that savvy. I don't know, but like, I just pay attention and think about like, how do I optimize my setting to make me better, more
Which is
capable of reaching my goals.
Yeah, which is what some of what you do for universities and for industries is help them change that environment, right? So what are some of the workshops and the techniques and things you do with all of that?
Yeah, so most of the work that I do is helping people to think about the culture and climate of teams and of environments. I actually spend less time helping people to think about that. But it is maybe a byproduct of it for sure. But yeah, so I have worked with mostly education organizations from pre-college, community college, and universities over the last 12 years. Really working hard to break back into industry. It's a little harder to break into than I thought. But I'm getting there. I've got first handful of clients this year, thanks to my TED Talk. And so, yeah, so it's helping people to recognize and intentionally create the environments that are going to allow people to be successful. And so there is some process, order, and efficiency to that, right? It's taking a systematic approach to understanding how do we create structures that allow us to mitigate the ways in which we have interpersonal biases, and those interpersonal biases become institutionalized and then become policies and practices that continue to marginalize and exclude people who have traditionally been excluded from places like tech and engineering and science.
So what do you think somebody should do, like as a leader or in a corporation or a student or something? Like how should they be able like reflect on themselves and then also maybe their environment and like make a decision of like, do I change environments? Do I stay here? Like, how can I try to bring the change within my own environment? And then at what point do you say like, no, I keep trying to bring change here. I'm trying to be the person that's more inclusive, and like now it's time for me to move? Or like, what would you tell anyone like that?
It's a tough question because, it's like telling a girlfriend who's in an abusive relationship to just keep hanging out. It's going to get better. Like,
no.
Sometimes there are some environments that are so toxic, that are so bad that you do need to leave for your own health. And so like, I'm never going to tell someone to just like grit it out, be more resilient, because that's not good for you. I do think though, that there are ways, especially with some of these engineering companies are so big. So like if your team is toxic, you could go to a team across the building and it won't be toxic, right? So maybe you just need to find another team to work with. Another tool and strategy, if you're, an individual contributor or, at whatever level you are in a company, is to like really plug into employee resource groups, whether they're, like the women in engineering, the minority groups, whatever, which I don't like the word minority, but that's what they tend to call them. So, whatever resource group that you can find community in, because just because you're in an environment that's like, all sort of round holes and you're the square peg and you don't fit, you need to go find the square peg board, right? So that you fit in, instead of continuing to like make yourself jam in and fit there. And so you have to take care of yourself, but you can also begin to lead change. There are tools that you can bring in for your team that if they're willing to have conversations, watch a TED Talk, have a conversation and say, hey, let's talk about these different ways that we can create a more inclusive and collaborative environment. How do we bring in, culturally responsive communication strategies? How do we think about, the ways in which people are facing barriers from a more systemic level? So like you can do those things. And if you're, at a point in your career where that sounds overwhelming, find people who are doing that and then help them. But, you need to take care of yourself and know that you don't fit in everywhere. And that doesn't mean you don't belong there. It means that there may be an environment that you're not going to have the potential to influence change over. Doesn't mean you can't, you could, but don't lose yourself in the process,
Yeah. Okay. I think I have one last question. That's kind of like, you can say, I don't want to answer that question. That's too difficult. But like, you've published a ton, you've done books, you've done a bunch of talks, you've done a bunch of workshops. Like, out of all of those, which one would you say, like, or which couple would you say are the ones that you're like, this best reflects my initiatives, my goals, and like how I want to help people?
I wouldn't say I've published a ton, but like I do. I've never published enough, right? Like I want to write a popular press book, but I think what makes me most proud is, so like my mission is to create services, tools, and resources that help inspire awareness and initiate action.
Mhm.
And so when I'm able to create tools that inspire awareness and initiate action, like that's what makes me so excited. And on my website, I had tons and tons of free resources that help people to move from inspiration and awareness to action. And
Mhm.
so that to me best symbolizes the work and the impact that I want to do, because yes, I would love for people to hire me to come help, but that's not always how it happens, right? Because you've got people who are on teams and they don't have budgets and they want to lead change. And so to me, like that's what's so important, is being really generous with my content and putting it out there. Because one of the things that brings me joy is to take really complex research and distill it down into something that says, okay, I can go put this into practice. Like nuggets that I can say, okay, I'm going to try this tool. Let me see how it works. Let me see what I learn. Let me see if it changes anything. Because, what we've learned being from in both academics and, real world is that people are busy and people don't have time to sit and process and distill all this down. And that's what I like to do, is like to take all of that heady stuff, put it in a shiny package and say, here, try this. And so to me, that's what's most meaningful. And I hope to take all of these tools and resources and to create a book out of that, so that it's like almost a turnkey set of solutions. But right now I'm just generating the content. And then when I have enough, I'll make that resource available where they're all tied together. But I think if I answered your question correctly, like
Yeah.
that's what gets me most excited. Well, I love speaking. I love teaching. I really also love leading, I just got elected as incoming chair to the Commission for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And
Yeah.
I'm really, really excited about that. And so what that means is like, I'm not chair for like another year or so. So
Mhm.
so I'm incoming chair for a year, and then I'll be chair. And I'm already like, I've got my plans, I've got my like advisory board,
That's
and
so
I'm already like
exciting.
pulling in my people like who I want to help me like lead this charge. And so like something that brings me so much joy is helping people to plug in,
Mhm.
because in like our professional organization, American Society for Engineering Education, it's huge, right?
Yes.
And it feels impossible to know how to get plugged in. And so like I have always done this, but continue to look forward to how do I like help people like pull them in and like get them plugged in and say, here's how you can help. And here's how you can serve, because that also gives me an opportunity to elevate other people
Yeah.
and to push them in a spotlight. And somebody did that for me, and like I want to continue doing that for others. And so I don't know. That was a lot of answers for your one question.
That was an amazing, like way more than I could have asked for. That was perfect. I do want to go back to one thing though. If somebody
Okay.
had one actionable thing that they could go do, like starting today, and just say like, okay, one small thing that I can do that might make a difference in my life and others' lives, and it'd be relevant to most people, what would you say is like one small thing someone could start doing?
It's going to be like one small thing, but it's a big thing. I want to encourage everyone to think about the term positionality. So positionality is understanding who you are in the social context of your identity and how it affects how you move through the world. And so it's a small thing and it's a big thing, because I'm asking you to like understand yourself, but I'm asking you to understand yourself in the context of everyone else. So it means that you're learning to acknowledge and recognize how power and privilege come into play in your life. And it also begins to help you build a systemic thinking lens and recognizing the barriers that other people face. And so in the act of then doing that, you can help to remove some of those barriers and at a minimum not be complicit in, you know, maintaining those barriers. And so particularly for people who come from dominant identities, if you have white skin like me, you know, that has given us a lot of privilege that we don't necessarily learn, and you have to unlearn the ways in which you've been conditioned in this world. And so I have a tool on my website that can help walk people through that. So you can go to engineerinclusion.com and then search in the search bar for positionality. So positionality, and then because some dictionaries don't think that's a word, but it is a word. And then find that tool and work through it. And so to do any work is we have to begin to think about who we are and how we move through the world and how we want to move through the world differently to create and to facilitate inclusive environments, to help other people, you know, to facilitate belonging for them. And so that's probably the one sort of key start I would encourage people to do. Is it's both awareness and action all in one.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to add, or?
Just, you know, thank you. And, you know, you've been a good friend and colleague and inspiration to me. And I'm excited to, you know, I'm available if people want to reach out, find me on LinkedIn or find my website, and, you know, use my tools and then let me know how it works for you. Like I welcome, I value feedback to improve. And so just thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.